So why don't we just jump right into it and introduce the very first speaker, who's someone I'm very excited to talk to. We're going to be speaking to Mr. Imam Hoque, who is the CEO and CPO of Quantexa, which is a company that uses... Oh, is he here? Hi. Hi, Imam. How are you? Do you want to introduce yourself and Quantexa a little bit?
I'm good. Yeah, sure. So we work with a whole range of organizations, from government departments to banks to large insurers, helping them to make the most out of data to tackle all the problems they may be facing. And the key aspect of making the most out of data is understanding the context that the data provides you. How is everything connected together? How does that influence what it is you're trying to do? And that really is the fundamental. So huge volumes of data to solve problems, and those problems can be anything from issues around credit risk and probability of default, a big topic for banks at the moment. It can be financial crime. It can be in the healthcare space, such as the COVID issues. And it can just be, how do we better understand and connect with our customers? So really, the data is a fundamental basis for this. And I guess, I did my master's in AI back in 1992, would you believe it, at Northwestern, when in the US, when AI wasn't really a big thing. And then you sort of don't use it for a long time. You think, well, what's all this data and AI stuff about? When's it going to become important? And then finally, it seems to have reached a complete tipping point now, where it's super accelerating and everybody's interested in what can I do with AI. And people often ask me, why did it change? What's different? And I said, well, you've got to think of it a little bit like the Industrial Revolution. When that happened, it was a massive change. But now, in the world of AI, the change is happening, but so much quicker. And why is that? It's three things have happened. Number one, data is everywhere. Companies, businesses, and people are aware of data in a way they never used to be, not just because of the internet, just generally. Number two, compute power is super available and super cheap. Anyone in their bedroom, get a credit card out, and for like $10, you can spin up a massive instance of AWS or GCP or Azure or whatever your favorite cloud hosting is, and run some really huge compute power. In the past, you had to order hardware and get all that stuff in. And then the third thing is, you imagine AI, it's kind of like people used to think of it as a brain in a bell jar. It's a bit disconnected. But now people have digital channels. So everyone interacts automatically with their bank through a digital channel. They interact with government services through digital channels. So why is it we should expect to start our journey digitally and then for it to interface to a human where it slows down to hours or days before we can achieve the outcome we want to achieve? So the digital channel has given that brain in the bell jar its sort of arms, legs, ears, and mouth. And it's those three things coming together that has allowed AI to explode and find all sorts of applications in a way that it never could before. So that's what we're organizations with.
Wow, that was a really nice overview, I think. And I hope a lot of the people watching were able to watch it and get, I suppose, a bit of a bigger, more general view on, what you do and really what the scope of data is at this point. But I guess I'll just ask you some more specific questions now, a little bit more pointed. How would you say that data is being used to, in the scope of this current pandemic? Is there anything new that's happening, or are these methods we've already seen before? I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, I think, the pandemic is an interesting thing, right? It's an indication of the way things are changing in the world. If it's not the pandemic, it would have been Brexit. If it's not Brexit, it would have been the change to globalization and global supply chains. If it wasn't that, it would be climate change. So what we're facing in the connected world is things happen so much faster than we're used to. Now, the pandemic is a great example of super fast. I mean, it's like beginning of March, you've got a situation. By the end of March, you've got a very different situation, and the government has to react super quickly. So The first step that really helped with the pandemic was just all the institutions gathering the data and at least communicating the scale of the problem, sharing exactly what was happening and how it was happening, and then starting to use statistical models to predict where it may end up. And, you know, this is probably the first time that the general public has been introduced in to the concept of statistical models, right? You know, most people won't have heard of them or understand what are these models and things. And all of a sudden, the whole of our futures, am I going to go to the pub or not? And when am I going to go to the pub is being governed by this statistical model. So it's a very rapid education process that's happened there. And it has opened up people's thinking. But the question is, the other side of it is the data privacy angle and the fear and concerns about data privacy. So there have been, you know, in the past, many instances where there have been lower level data privacy questions and issues. They've always been there. I remember back in 2004-5, I was involved in the creation of something called the UK's Insurance Fraud Bureau. And we were collecting all policy and all claim data for the UK, and we had to go and see the Information Commissioner and ask if it was proportional. And back then, people weren't quite so concerned about data privacy, and they all said, well, actually, no, it is proportional because it's ensuring that our insurance policy costs don't go through the roof because they were escalating because all the fraudsters. And that was one angle. And then the second angle was, well, is it better for a computer to analyze this and come up with an answer, or for teams of people to analyze something and consider whether it was fraud or not? And actually, you know, in the cold light of day, quite often when people are analyzing situations, they'll say, oh, you know, it's this town and it might be this ethnicity involved, so we think it's fraud. And they'll jump to those terrible conclusions as stereotypes, whereas actually computers are far more logical. Now, having said that, obviously when you're processing data, a super logical computer is a little bit like an autistic person, and it may not be conscious of some of the socially acceptable things that you can and can't infer from data. So you have to be very careful. You have to coach these models so that they are not introducing the sorts of biases that would be unacceptable in today's society. But data privacy is a really large concern and issue, but it's a balance. I mean, we've always in the UK had terrorism. And, you know, obviously the UK use a huge amount of data in counterterrorism. But that's acceptable, right? Because it means you can go shopping, most of you won't remember, but you could go shopping in Warrington on a Saturday morning without being concerned that your children might get blown up by a terrorist bomb. Or, you know, you can go out to a pub and not expect, you know, a big explosion to occur. And then the other use of data, obviously tax authorities have huge amounts of data because they're collecting the cash for the government. And we all are used to the fact that they know what our interest payments are from the banks and these sorts of things. So people do get used to it, but there's always a bit of a concern. And quite rightly, there has to be a balance. I mean, there was a time when there was a process called RIPA, which was all about sharing phone calls and phone information. And it was being abused by councils to check whether parents were trying to put their children in schools that weren't in their catchment area, stuff like that, which is just disproportionate. So I think care needs to be taken, but coronavirus is an interesting one because it is so disruptive. Right now, there's a debate, you know, should we just put the whole of Leicester City into lockdown or not? Now, you know, is that proportionate or not? What's it going to do to the people? Actually, how successful is that going to be? Are people going to go, well, I can't go out? What? I'm going to try and get out of Leicester and go and visit family elsewhere, and then I can carry on as if I'm not in lockdown. Will that cause more spread of the problem? So, you know, we've obviously seen the concerns about big brother issues with government, track and trace, and these sorts of things. But it is a question of what is invasive use of technology and data, and what is proportionate use of technology and data. Clearly, if you were concerned that somebody knew everywhere you were at every point in time because of the mobile device you were carrying, you might not feel that's acceptable or proportional. However, if you consider the data that government does have, just think about this model. They know where everyone works, right? Tax Authority has employment records and PAYE records. We know who goes to what schools. We know where everyone lives from electoral roll. We know where all the hospitals are and the hospital staff. We actually know where a whole bunch of the cases are, some 300,000 of them. So technically, without even having mobile devices, imagine that network of data. Plot it as a network. Who lives with who in which household for an electoral roll? Who works in which company and may see colleagues in that company? Which children go to which schools? Which elderly or vulnerable people live in what homes and who works in those homes? Or who shares a property with someone like that? If you know where people live and where they work, you can probably infer which public transport routes they're using. So imagine that is a network. You can literally plot the whole network of the whole country of those interactions. And then if you drop on top the cases, current live cases, you could start being far more selective and granular about lockdown. So maybe you wouldn't lock down the whole of Leicester City, but you would say it's this particular set of schools, it's these companies, and it's these public transport routes which represent the highest risk. Let's just look at that as a granular intervention rather than the whole thing. So having that sort of data, you can imagine, be very powerful, because you could plot on that network propagation, you know, that the R number in a nursery is probably quite high, because little kids like to wipe each other's snotty noses and do whatever they do in those nurseries. Whereas somebody who's working in an office, you know, that is a very different sort of arrangement. They can clean meeting rooms, clean desks, space desks one out, and all those sorts of things. So data can be very powerful in terms of modeling if used correctly. The question of the track and trace apps, I think it's, in fact, when I saw the list of potential topics to discuss, which was sent a while ago, it said, UK is thinking of launching this. What do you think? Well, we kind of know where that's ended up. I mean, it's tricky. Some societies are willing to accept higher levels of, and always have accepted higher levels of, you know, quotes unquotes control. They don't have to be your traditional, you know, communist sort of territories or highly controlled territories. Even places like Singapore have always had a higher level of sort of government involvement with society. And it varies from one place to another. Even very places you consider very open, like Norway, they have reacted quite differently to the whole COVID case, and I think they've only had less than 100 deaths or something like that as a result. I mean, they're a small nation, but so data is very powerful when used correctly. It is that question, though, of how do you use it proportionally?
That's really interesting. I was actually going to bring up, I apologize for the echo. I'm not sure if it's something on my end. My apologies. But I don't seem to have earphones on hand, or I might try to find them in a moment. But I wanted to ask, as you brought up, there are societies that are more and less open to, you know, data being kept. For instance, Germany is, you know, kind of on one extreme, where even trying to get a passport made is a whole process because the government won't allow itself to keep information on you. Yeah. So every time you have to reprove that you are actually German to get anything. Whereas then, you know, there's countries like Korea where information in the tracking system, such as, you know, even where people lived who had, you know, had COVID, was being sent out to people around them. So there's such a discrepancy. And do you think with this difference, not only culturally, but also in terms of regulation, does that pose a serious problem, not just to, you know, the efforts to fight COVID, but to the industries, you know, containing companies such as yours that work in data? Does the kind of mismatch in terms of regulation around the world, is that a big problem? Is that a hindrance to you?
I wouldn't say it's a hindrance to us. I think it's every country judges its own level of data privacy. I mean, we adapt to all sorts of different ways of working. I'll give you a really interesting example. We're currently working with the EU on imagine all these little packages that you purchase that might come from China or other countries, and they come in and out of the EU. They want to track all of those packages for security reasons, because it might be the case that you don't want to be selling mushrooms on a supermarket shelf from Chernobyl or Fukushima at the moment, for example, just one case. But there's many reasons why you need to track these packages for dual-use military goods, for other risks, and so on and so forth. In America, that data set is publicly available. It's published. Every single package, 1 billion records for the year. In the EU, even the EU within themselves, for their own internal customs purposes, can't agree to how they use all of that data for privacy purposes. In America, they published it. Anyone can download it and look at it. So, you know, and you think, well, America's sort of, would they share all that data? Well, clearly they have. So it does vary hugely. I think, you know, when you're doing big data related projects, like if you take the COVID impact, for instance, on banks at the moment, I was talking to a bank the other day, we're putting a system in to help them. They have given out, imagine this, 7 years worth of loans in 1 month. Now, the normal process of giving a loan to a business involves a credit risk decision officer looking at everything. You just can't do that. This is, you know, 7 times 12, 84 times more volume in a given time. So now they want to have models to do it better. And of course, models can help, but what they have to do next is review all those loans in a year's time. So now they've got a year to get systems in to build statistical models. Now, the more data you have access to, the better. Company ownership structures, directors, who those companies transact with. The bank, because it's a commercial entity and they've lent to you, they've asked in return that you do share all that data. And that's the difference. You have a commitment there where you share the data because you're getting something back, a loan. Just like when you go shopping in Tesco or one of the supermarkets where you got a store card, you willingly give them access to every single thing you buy, how much alcohol you buy, what other products you buy, you know, all of that data you are sharing willingly with those organizations in return for something. And likewise on the internet, you know, whatever you're doing on Facebook, you're being bombarded with adverts, you are sharing a lot of data. The issue with sharing with government is the fear that government has a power that commercial organizations don't. And that is the government can put you in jail, they can maybe get something wrong which interferes in your life in some way. However, you've got to provide a certain level of trust to the government to enable these things to happen. Otherwise, your question, different countries are doing different things. I strongly feel that those countries that are being overprotective about data are going to find themselves behind those countries who are more willing to use data. You know, case in point, if countries like Norway have reacted the way they have, and they're doing quite a bit with their data, and some of the other countries, they're going to get out of this COVID issue faster than other countries are. And they're going to have less draconian measures. And data, frankly, data tells you a huge amount about general illnesses, how hospitals can operate better, how health systems can be optimized, how you can learn about these things, how you can better service the public and put in facilities. Really, if you're locking down your data, you're trying to sort of fight a battle with one hand tied behind your back, which I think is a mistake. And I think people need to understand that any decisions you make need to be fact-based. They need to be based on data. Why not have a model help to inform the decision you're making? You can't always expect humans to be able to consume the data at the rate at which an AI model can consume it. And that's not to say that your AI model should be, you know, a black box model. We really do say models should be the combination of really intelligent input from humans with data enrichment and enhancement. So rather than just a pure, I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to build a model to give out loans, okay? A bank giving out loans to commercial customers. Now, you could say, let's say we took every single bit of data from that bank for the last 5 years and build a trainer model, predictive model, whatever techniques you want to use, whether it's logistic regressions, whether it's, some deep learning algorithm. I can guarantee you the model still won't be as effective as the credit risk decision officer. And the reason being is the credit risk decision officer has been taught through an education where the education is a collective aggregation of all of the knowledge of lending since the Middle Ages across the globe for every single bank. And that is compounded into a set of learnings that the person is taught. So to expect AI to be able to purely deep learn out of data, I think is a little bit maybe overambitious, unless you happen to have as much data as Google. They have a lot of data, and there are a set of things that you can deep learn well, like the translations and so on and so forth. But in most everyday scenarios, you combine the enriched knowledge with what an expert can tell you, with what a data model can tell you. So, for instance, if you think about money laundering, money launderers or fraudsters, there are so many ways in which they can launder the money that you just don't have enough nicely categorized known outcomes to train a model. But what you do have are people there who will say, well, if someone has registered, 5 offshore entities and 6 companies in a very cheap property, that's a bad sign. And you say, well, why is that? Because they probably recruited someone on the internet and they've just signed up to have their name given as a director of these businesses. Now, a model would not have been able to really determine that. It's just one of too many variables. So, and another example would be if a foot passenger goes across from Calais to Dover and a truck goes across, and at the same time, multiple times, the same passenger and truck has gone across together, that's really weird. A model wouldn't pick that up because there's so many foot passengers and so many trucks. But that coincidence, an expert will tell you, that's a really bad sign. It means that truck is carrying contraband or drugs because the foot passenger is a minder. And if somebody at the other side of the channel is trying to redirect those drugs, that foot passenger will step in. And we know that. So you build that into your model. But equally, that expert hasn't got the capacity and brain power in the 30 minutes from when the truck is boarding the ferry at Calais to be able to check who owns the truck, who owns the logistics firm, what other companies are those directors ever owned in the past, how many times have contraband been seized in those trucks, in those other companies in the past. So that sort of turbocharging of data expertise, you can't expect a human to do. So you bring the two together, the best input from the humans, the best input from big data analysis, and then the sort of expert deep learning, and then you get a really good model. And it tends not to be black box, it's very explainable, which is important. Transparency is critical. Everyone will want to know, why was my loan? Why did you flag me as a customer that was high risk? Why, whatever. And that's part of GDPR, it's explainability.
So can I ask a quick question? Someone actually here, goodness, so sorry about this echo. I thought my earphones would fix it, but they appear to not have done. But someone's written a comment here that's asking, you don't always have enough clearly labeled data to work with. Can't you use machine learning with unstructured data? Someone's asked this question, and I wonder what your thoughts might be about the use of machine learning on unstructured data. A little bit quickly, though, because we've only got 5 minutes to go. So if you could give your thoughts on this, and also some, closing thoughts about what you think, the people watching might want to think about in the space or what to look forward to.
Yeah, so machine learning has many components of it. Some of it is unsupervised, so you can do a lot of clustering, and that's very powerful and useful to understand how one organization is different to others and what might be an outlier. And you can certainly use a lot of machine learning on unstructured data, if you have enough unstructured data, like adverse media in the news and those sorts of things. So yes, you can use that to great success. It's all about a combination and using the right things in the right places. I think in terms of takeaways from this, I would say, firstly, always think about the input data and the context it provides you. You know, remember that nothing is a set of single observations. A company has directors, it has shareholders, it transacts with other companies, and that forms a network. So think about the network as an input into a model. Don't assume that it's easy to get all your data perfectly organized. You also have the issue of internal data sources, external data sources. Unfortunately, we don't all have labels or numbers. So you have to match Imam Hoque, 28th of the 7th, 1966, with Imam Hoque, 28th of the 1st, 1966. Are they the same or not? So you've got to do that data quality cleanup. So these are all things that you need to get as input to your model. Then once you've got your model, then you have to worry about how do I operationalize it? How do I help augment what a human's doing or a user's doing with my model? How do I point them at where the risk or opportunity is? How do they interact with the model? How does the model update itself? So too often when people think about big data and they think about models, they think about it as a sort of isolated mathematical thing, as opposed to the end-to-end operational system, from the data, how you join it, how you prepare it, how many other sources of data can you use to what outcome are you trying to achieve. And I think, you know, the UK government, certainly in the work that's done around coronavirus, maybe was hoping that this track and trace thing would be the end all and be all, and then they get it quite right, and now they're sort of, so, you know, you've got to take a holistic view to these things and think about lots of different approaches. If you know, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again, but don't just keep trying the same thing, right? Try other things. And that's what it's about in the world of big data analytics and modeling. You've got to bring in different data sets. You've got to prepare the data in different ways. You've got to have people interacting with the data in a different way to get the outcomes that you want.
As nice of a roundup as that was, it does seem like we do have a little bit more time than expected. So it would be great actually that you brought it up. If you could talk a little bit about what you think went wrong with the UK tracing system versus, you know, the more successful ones we might see in the East, like Singapore that you mentioned, or South Korea.
Yeah, it's hard to say about what has worked well and what we didn't do right. I think to get something like this sort of track and trace app thing working, you actually need quite a lot of discipline there's a few things you need. You need an environment where people are willing to share quite a bit of their data. Then you need a good amount of discipline and self adoption, which doesn't come that easily if your population is one that's not normally used to sort of, you know, being told what to do and just accepting it and getting on with it. You know, there's no chewing gum on the streets in Singapore. It's not quite the same way in London, unfortunately, despite people telling you don't spit chewing gum on the floor. So I think with these things, it was, I think they were hoping it would work the same, but actually the characteristics of that operational system were different. And that's a bit of the challenge there.
And you mentioned, sorry, you mentioned that you know, there's a difference, very much there is a difference between Singapore streets and London streets, and that's true. And you also mentioned earlier that Norway's done a very good job. But I mean, at the time when I researched, this may have changed now, but it looked like only 1 in 5 Norwegians were actually on the contact tracing app. So do you think that Norway managed to somehow, you know, use other methods, or is there just
a few things a little differently?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they combined the capability. So Norway has a single major telecoms operator, Telenor. And Telenor were able to mobilize very quickly, because they've been doing a lot of work with their data, to see how you can use data in a fully anonymized way. And I think by combining that with the app, they were able to fill in a lot of the blanks and get more value out of it as a complete sort of operation and system. So they were able to, on an aggregate level, without getting down to the granular who's doing exactly what, see general flows of where movements were happening and people were moving around and things like that. So, slightly different approach.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think you said a lot of really insightful things, and hopefully the people watching live and also the people who will watch this after it's been put up will learn a lot. I personally thought it was really interesting. So hopefully at UCL Fintech, we'll be able to see more of you for the upcoming year and moving forwards. Thank you so much, Imam Hoque, for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.